In the next hour, we're going to cover how you can basically build AI workflows, whether in your job or for your company or on behalf of other clients. The goal is for the conversation to be as practical and hands-on as possible, of frameworks and tools that we will be sharing at the end, so that you can walk away from this talk away with practical things that you can reuse. So bear with me until the end so that you can access it all. I think we can get started. So first of all, I think we're just going to very quickly introduce ourselves and why we are first doing this talk. So I'm Vlad. I'm the founder of Elements Agents. We are building AI solutions for clients, ranging from insurance companies all the way to like fintechs and just large SMEs. But the goal is to really cut down the workload by 90% and make sure that you can recoup your investment in less than 3 months. That's kind of the North Star whenever we build workflows. Now I'm going to go to the agenda for today. Basically start with an AI agent refresher. You probably heard as many definitions for an AI agent as there are days in the year. I'm just going to give you one of them. It might be different again tomorrow, but this is just going to be the foundation and the context for our conversation of today. Then we're going to move on to look at what's going on in the market. You probably heard a lot about specific reports that have made a lot of noise recently around what makes for a good and a bad case for agents and automation in general. Get straight into the weeds, and we're going to give you the tools, and we're going to go over 3 different workflows that we have. And we're going to walk you through exactly step by step how we are approaching and defining out of the 3 workflows, which ones are suitable for automation, which ones are probably the best, and which ones we should start building first. And then finally, we're going to design that workflow together. I will show you a sketch on how you can think about those designs and what are the major fundamental blocks for that. And along the way, we're going to prototype and show you exactly how you can come up with your first MVP, so that by the end of the conversation, you will know exactly how to shortlist the workflows you want to build, how to design the automation for it, and how you can building that automation. And along the way, we will be providing checklists, frameworks, tools, and tips to get started. And yeah, so the purpose of this conversation is for Guillaume and I to just bounce around some ideas on how we approach these things that much. So we're going to figure out whether we agree on certain topics or not. Those conversations are never different approaches, but hopefully we can agree on certain fundamentals. All right, so like I said, agent refresher, and this is coming from LlamaIndex, which is just a major agentic solutions. So agents are LLM-powered knowledge assistants. So LLM-powered just as if you were talking to ChatGPT, and then within ChatGPT, you have different capabilities, also called tools, to be able to browse. And it can be to analyze an Excel sheet or analyze a PDF. And then basically you give it a set of tasks, and then it's going to sequentially break down those tasks into smaller steps. And then the agent will be able to figure out exactly which tools need to be used when. So maybe step 1, step 2 is to look up the document. Step 3 is to consolidate all the information to then eventually synthesize the knowledge and decide about the next steps. All of this is what makes for an agent today. It might evolve. There are different variants also around this, but especially around memory. So I think what's really interesting with agents is that they can accumulate knowledge. So this opens up so many opportunities for personalization, but also to improve the performance of your automation over time, which is a big distinction with traditional automation. So this is just a different way you can look at it. So you have automation, LLMs, and AI agents, and across the 3 major dimensions, workflow. So an AI agent is a workflow, so you can have a start and an end point. It is autonomous in the sense that it can figure out autonomously which tool to call to achieve a specific goal. And it is smart because it has this LLM component for it to reason and decide, what are, out of all the possible next steps, the most suitable ones to achieve the goal. You have a question?
No. So the small thing I would add with AI agents here is around the notion of being autonomous. So something you can either give an objective to an agent, like maybe some of you have tried deep research on ChatGPT, and like you give it a question and it's going to go and figure out on its own a range of things, break down steps on its own, figure out what tasks to do on its own, and then achieve a result. You have a middle way to this, which is actually understanding a workflow ahead of time and giving the structure and steps to follow to the agent, so that you at least have a bit of visibility as to what the agent is going to do. So you can either just give an objective to the agent, like figure something out, and it's going to do a complex task, look on the web, find some information, and figure out on its own what to do. Or you can kind of pre-plan it to a certain extent so that it corresponds to your business needs and to the way you do things today without AI.
Yeah. So this is just a different way to look at it. So coming back to the 3 components, and we can tie it back to Guillaume, you can add on to that. But basically you have the autonomous part. I think you can see my arrow, right? So this is more of a scheduled job. So it's maybe just for illustrative purposes, but basically it's going to check up for new emails automatically. And then as soon as you get a new email, it's going to kick off the workflow. And then within that workflow, you have the reasoning part. So in the reasoning part, you have analyzed the emails and deciding what to do with that information. So you can, and we're going to see that later on, but you can define and perform specific actions based on the content of the email. It could be generating a quote, looking in your inventory, or looking up stuff online. And then finally, you have a sequence of steps. And at each step of the way, you have the LLM that is reasoning to decide, okay, are we done? Should we move on to the next step? And so on and so forth. And then eventually it just autonomously decides whether it has to reply, whether it has to continue the conversation within that same thread with the same person, and so on. So this is just like a simple way to look at it. I don't know if Guillaume, you want to add on to that. Yeah? Okay, perfect. So now let's get on to what we've all heard about lately. So you may have heard about the MIT research, which has made a lot of noise lately, talking about how basically all the AI pilots are failing, and which is kind of supporting the thesis that we are in the hype cycle, where everyone is getting disillusioned about the capabilities of agents. But what's actually interesting is if you look into the report a little bit more in more depth, you can see that there are specific use cases which actually work. So the goal again of this conversation and the rest of this talk is to show you, okay, what are the key components that make the 5% of the successful pilots, so that you can only focus on these ones and step away and avoid basically this ravine of failures. And this is a new report that came out today, I think, about work slop destroying productivity. So we probably all experience this to different extents, but sometimes it just feels that we are getting some good results by just sending a bunch of stuff to Claude or ChatGPT. But then when it comes to actually using and making this information intelligible, we realize that, okay, it looks good from afar, but then as you get into the details, it's clunky, it's inaccurate, and it's not reliable, and you don't feel comfortable enough using that information with your clients or your colleagues, which means that there is this feeling of being productive, but you're not. And I think this falls also under the failures of something that makes you feel good and that isn't helpful. You want to say something?
No, do you have some examples a bit of what you've Is it the next step?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So basically there are different reasons for these projects to fail, but there are major that fall under major buckets. But overall, most of the time, the projects that fail are due to 3 reasons. The first one is that people are just building with AI just for the sake of building with AI. So they don't really tie it back to a business outcome. And this is like the first and foremost challenge. I don't know if, Guillaume, you've experienced that, but sometimes people come up with like projects. And then when it comes to building them and to implementing them, they either don't really know how this is going to impact their bottom line. And once you give them a quote, they're like, oh, well, actually, this is not super relevant. So it kind of goes from, building an MVP for something that is not going to be used, that doesn't have any tangible impact or expected outcome on the bottom line. And so this also leads a lot of projects to fail because they're just like fancy projects just for fun, basically.
I think there's if we unpack this a little bit from my perspective on those, especially the document processes, etc., you have a lot of noise. And that noise, if you're a decision maker in a company, if you're in your own workflows, first of all, the first thing is almost everyone uses ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is great, and you're going to keep on using it for a bunch of things, right? But it's capping the potential to probably 10% or 5% of what AI could do. And then you have all those different tools. So with AI, the thing now is that you can experiment with lots of things. So you have lots of teams in companies that experiment with various different stuff. It's not really coordinated. There isn't really a clear objective, like you said. I think one thing that also corresponds to the agent you've just showed before is that it's a lot of AI that is thrown at the problem, hoping that you're going to, we were sold, when ChatGPT was released, it was like people felt like they were not going to have a job anymore 6 months after, where in reality, you throw some AI at the problem, then you realize that it's super easy to get to something that 80% good, but like the last 20% is super hard, because often you need to start by understanding what you're actually doing, mapping the process, breaking down all the steps that you're doing, really knowing what you're doing to be able to automate it. So you have a lack of this effort of like really mapping out how you do things, to then prioritize what you should really be using AI for, because sometimes it's useless, or sometimes you can try to do something with AI which is impossible and much easier to do still manually. And so there's this combination of a lot of noise, lack of time spent on actually scoping out the problems and prioritizing, and also some politics, like people internally in companies for the past 2 years have had to say to their board that they were doing something, but it was just to do something, not really, the results were not necessarily expected. So a bunch of all those things. The final point, I think, especially in the context of a company, and if you're trying to implement in your companies, it's like expectations management. It's like people have expectations that are wrong from the onset. So you think that in 48 hours, you're going to transform how you've worked for the past 10 years. And that's sometimes a bit of a challenge. So it's like AI needs a methodological process to be successful and to get past the shiny demos, basically. And that's why most of those things fail. Super easy to start, but then it tends to fail.
Yeah. And to add on to that, I think that everything around adoption and trust. So what I mean by that is, if you are building a very nice automation that requires a user or an employee to log into a new platform, and they spend 95% of their day on Slack, they're not going to use the product. It doesn't matter how good it is. You have to make sure that it's connected to how they already work. So I think this is also important as part of scoping a project is, okay, sure, those are the 10 steps we need to perform or achieve. But then ultimately, all of this is worthless unless we can find a way to connect to whatever ERP or Slack or communication channel that you are using today. And then finally, you also mentioned and touched on politics. There's also something around teaching. So we're all scrambling, we're all busy with our lives. And unless, even if it connects to Slack, if people don't really know that it exists, or they don't really know how to use it, they're not going to use it. So you also need to make sure that once you've built something, that you teach exactly with the handovers, trainings, whatever. You just gather everyone in the room, teach them exactly how to use the tool, how to use it, what they can expect from it, what they cannot expect from it as well. Sometimes people expect a silver bullet, but it's as important to show them the limitations of the tools and to show them how they can use that in their workflow. So yeah, that was pretty much just around the problems, which leads us to basically the solutions. And this is where we're going to focus most of our time from now on. As part of the roadmap, you need a carefully designed workflow. So you need to know all the steps involved, right? So how many documents you need to analyze, where are they located, how to analyze them, where to send all the information, in Slack or Excel, whatever. It has to have a clear business goal. So are you trying to improve your top line? Are you trying to save up on R&D costs? Are you trying to reduce your costs of customer support? So always try to think about which line item on your income statement this automation is going to have an impact. Then third is make sure ahead of time that you can connect to the systems that you're using. So know the limitations and the kind of red lines ahead of time, so that you don't build 95% of a project that you cannot connect to whatever tool you're using. And then finally, you need to engage, and this is not just a nice to have, you need to think about the users, and you need to plan and allocate the resources to teach, form, and really reward the engagement. So this can come from you can encourage and have activation metrics from the top of the team saying, okay, you need to use these tools for this amount of time, share the learnings once a week, organize some monthly meetups about it, and so on. So really allocate some resources to that. I don't know if you want to add something to that.
It's a very small thing. Is because there can be like a bunch of things to have on the checklist, like all the steps that you need, etc. Like there is a bit of a tedious part because you're going to get crazy results. So, but there's also, with AI, you can get some quick wins as well that are not like the reliable long-term, but from the get-go, you should also show live with live products, quick wins to your colleagues, to people you work with, just to get people excited. Even if that's not, but while managing expectations, that's not the end game, but a lot of people have some fear or lack of trust or anything. And sometimes you just need to open their eyes to the possibilities so that you can get some buy-in and get all those steps done and like get moving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So now let's get to the fun part. What makes for a good AI workflow? Fun is maybe an overstatement, but so just in terms of the kind of opportunities, and this is just like a simple quadrant. Essentially, you're going to have a checklist and you want to evaluate your workflow and see whether they fit under any of these quadrants. So there are two major dimensions. The first one is, are we trying to automate to save up time, right? So this is like a bottleneck under operations. Is it like repetitive? Is it tedious? Is it long? Is this something we need to do for 1 hour every morning? Is this something that we need to do 300 times for 10 seconds? Basically you need to identify this kind of problem. Or is it a bottleneck around people? So sometimes you have some, high churn. So you have a bunch of new customer representatives. You want to build a chat to onboard and train new sales representatives. Well, the bottleneck is that they always leave after 3 months. So you're always spending resources and time teaching them. Or it could be around human errors. So sometimes, parsing and going through a bunch of documents, you can make a lot of errors. So you want to increase that reliability. So there are certain areas where AI is just, more performant and are doing jobs that people hate. So that's good to know. And then the second dimension is around untapped opportunities. So with AI, you can basically think about new business opportunities. So it could be either around personalization. So thinking about, if you receive 300 emails a day, there's no way you can personalize them and like research every company that reaches out. But now with AI, you can build an agent that can look up the website, look up the person, what they've said online, and really reply with a level of personalization that didn't exist until now. So this is, falling under untapped. And then untapped customization. I don't know why it's not customization. It's basically like productizing. So you can automate a whole set of steps, which opens new business models. So you can think, and this is kind of a buzzword in the industry, it's productized services. So if you basically have a lot of people doing a lot of small steps to offer a service, so let's say you do SEO, and as part of the SEO, you do an audit, then you come up with like a content plan, and then as part of the content plan, you create the content. Well, now you can basically use agents that specialize in each area, and then eventually you can create something that is entirely automated, and you can sell SEO content creation as a service, which is completely automated. So those are the kind of quadrants. And this is basically just a non-exhaustive list, but you can think of it of a checklist of to quickly evaluate a workflow. Whenever you have a problem that you're thinking about, the more boxes it ticks, the more likely it is to be prone for automation. Do you want to add anything?
No, I had a little thing to add to the previous quadrant, which is something that might be that appears to be working a lot, generally speaking, and something we've come across. A lot of successes are done where people previously did not have time to do it in their companies, or like they wanted to, like you say, customize something for clients, but it was just like they didn't have the bandwidth to do it. When it comes to productized services, it's something we've done with clients, with consultants, for example, where instead of just selling a deliverable presentation, they would put the content of that presentation into an AI chatbot to their own clients, so that their clients don't have to go and look through 80 different slides, but can do some question answering on those various slides, with all the privacy reasons that it embeds, and the AI chat embedding their way of thinking. So it exists. And the one thing is, it seems also sometimes easier to do something new, depending on the industries, where if you have a process that's super well mapped, like there's a set of things that you want to do with your emails, you can put a lot of automation there. Sometimes when you have some processes that are highly cognitive, where you have to think, make decisions, blah, 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 in the context of those consultants, it might be easier to create something new than integrating into existing workflows. At first, just a question of prioritization, because when you do something new, like you don't have to break anchored habits. You're just creating a new possibility. Whereas if you have to insert AI into a document production process, you really have to break it down into very granular steps to make it happen. So look for different types of opportunities, and for a first step, because you just need to get going and to get things started, and then you get the buy-in around you.
Yeah. So this is just a quick example, but basically, say you're a customer representative at a large shipping company. every time your customer's product arrive, you need to communicate with the client and the logistics partner to agree on a delivery time slot. And generally what this involves is a bunch of back and forth, between the logistics provider, the third-party logistics provider, the client, which is super tedious. It has to be 24/7. So it ticks a lot of boxes, and it would fall under the quadrant of ops and people bottleneck. So it's most likely, to be a workflow that is worth automating. Great. So now let's just talk a little bit about 3 different examples of workflows. So we have one which is about email inbound qualification. This is simply, let's say you are a service provider, you provide home renovation services, you have a strong foothold in your region, and you're getting a bunch of requests. You want to be able to quickly qualify and identify those that are worth your time, and you don't want to get stuck, answering small amounts. And then you also want to make sure that you can win the big fish. So this is basically something that will allow you to do that. The second one is around consulting reports. Maybe Guillaume, you want to tell us more about these ones that you've worked on?
So this is, if I just try to break it down, so consulting, the goal here is you have an investment consultant in a financial consulting company. They produce strategic reports for clients as to whether to invest or not in a company. They have to figure out a bunch of recommendations about topics, whether to invest or not. But this is something like, we have a concrete example. One workflow generates 500K per year, executed by one person. Each report takes 6 weeks to build. The thing is, on paper, okay, great, AI to make a report. You think it's going to be overnight. The reality is the report was never the end game. It's like you have a person that's driving the task, that needs to own the knowledge, that needs to communicate it with clients. And so the way to tackle this is you have to really break it down. And when you look at it, well, there are some tasks that can be done with AI and some that cannot. Running interviews has to still be done by the person about the different topics. Transcribing those interviews can be done with AI. Compiling the results, AI plus the person. Getting external data to augment the answers can be done with AI. Then grouping all the information you've collected on a per topic basis, AI will do it. But then once you have all your information clean, the consultant has to make a choice as to which information to focus on, what are the recommendations to actually put in the document. So it's really breaking things down a bit tediously at first into all those steps that are being performed and identifying how much you can automate from it. And we're in a case where it takes several weeks, but we managed to automate 50% of the process. It's a back and forth between the human and the machine. The human is in the loop, and the human gets control of the judgment part, still processes the information. The AI does all the repetitive, tedious, time-consuming parts that would be doable by anyone. That's just like a time loss. And this combination makes it save 50% of the time on a 500K workflow. But this takes a couple of weeks to put together. And so it has huge upside potential, but it also has some tediousness attached to it. And that's another case you have to also get some quick wins. So you can, instead of aiming for everything from the get-go, map the process, first do 20%, then 30%, then 40%. And then you have various techniques to keep on increasing this. That's an example of something that feels paper super easy, generate a report. In reality, it's something with a process that's like buried in people's mind, in the person's mind. And so you have to unpack this to be able to successfully put AI. And if you just try to throw something at it, it's 100% not going to work. So it's like it has to be done in a very methodological way. Basically.
Yeah, and that's why we're gonna carefully evaluate each of these workflows across the different dimensions to hopefully increase the odds that we succeed at building them. And then finally, just a voice agent for customer support whenever you want to confirm appointments and make sure that people will show up. If you're a clinic or any service provider, just reducing the number of no-shows can really have an impact on your bottom line. So those are the 3 workflows. So how can you actually shortlist workflow? And for that, they are basically 4 questions you need to ask yourself. So starting from the checklist, you have a bunch of workflows. Now you want to understand which ones are worth building. And so the first question you need to ask yourself is the goal clear? And in other words, do you know where it ends? Do you know where do you know where it starts? Do you know where it ends? Do you know exactly the ideal outcome? Is it clear how this is going to impact your operations? So all of this is super important because you cannot really create, even if we're talking about untapped opportunity, you cannot solve business problems. You cannot ask a consultant or tech solution to solve a business problem. You need to basically identify what's already working and automate it. And then it's a matter of catching up and improving and introducing new business models. But you're not going to crack your sales strategy by just automating something because you don't know what to automate. So that's the first thing. The second one is, are the savings worth your attention? Because when you think about the ROI, you obviously have a lot of savings, but then it doesn't matter if you can save a lot if the cost of that solution is super high. And I think that, Guillaume, coming back to your workflow, sure, you can save a lot of money, but then the big question is, how complex is this, and can we reasonably expect to reach 80% automation? What are the costs of the people who are doing this today? Is this going to stay the same? Are we planning on outsourcing this to some BPOs somewhere? So you always have this tension between the savings versus the complexity of the project. And then finally, once you have shortlisted those workflows, you need to understand, are we trying to build momentum? Is this supposed to be transformational? What's the most urgent problem? So this is everything around urgency. How are you going to sequence all of these workflows that you've shortlisted? Maybe you want to add to this tension on ROI and how you've
No, it's a fine line. It depends. You would really see. If you're going for complex workflows, you need to have some very high buy-in, because there's going to be an effort, and it needs to be very clear from the get-go. Because otherwise, we've had a lot of examples where the potential is super high, but because there are all those things to do, basically encoding a knowledge that is all over the place in the person's head, people don't have time. You can end up spending weeks and weeks and weeks trying to gather some information, and it can be just a big effort that never yields any results. So I think that, it depends on the buy-in and how much of a strategic priority it is for the person. And if you're unsure, start with something that's easier, that yields some results fast, and then you get to the more complex stuff. Sometimes you don't know everything in advance. You just need to get into the weeds of it.
Yeah, exactly. So goal clarity, so being able to tie it back to an outcome, to have a clear start and end, and also the red lines. What are the things you're not willing to compromise on? I think whenever you're building these things is, if you're building an AI agent that can reach out to your biggest customers, is this a red line? Would you maybe stop at the draft section because you don't want to be able to include that send functionality? So it's super important to also know, your biggest fears. So this famous quote that we have, not from us. If you can describe it, you can do it. So it's not from us, it's from Sundar.
No, it's just one thing. I've been asked, for example, okay, can I put all 3,000 emails into an AI? And that was the end of the question. Mm-hmm. What for? What's the goal? What do you want to do with this? Unclear. Maybe we'll figure something out. No, you will not figure something out. You need to have some clarity. Yeah. Thank you, Sundar.
Thank you, Sundar, for those wise words. So now you can think, okay, we have those 3 workflows in terms of scope. And here, this is just for the sake of the exercise. We can think that the email inbound qualification, consulting report are 2 fairly clear workflows. We kind of know what we want. We are already doing it manually, and we just want to automate as much as we can. We know the start, we know the end. Whereas with the voice agent for customer support, the learning curve is too high. There are too many unknowns, and we don't feel necessarily ready to build that for our operations. We don't know how customers will react to an artificial voice. So we are just defining, the red line is we don't want to sound artificial. We're not entirely certain what we want to incorporate in the voice agent. So we're basically just going to move on and go from 3 shortlisted workflows to 2. Then second section is around estimating savings. So here, your savings are depending how much into the details you want to get, but it's just a product of frequency times duration times cost. So the higher the salary, and this is why service businesses like lawyers are super good targets for those AI automations, because they charge $2,000 per hour for as consultancy fees. So every hour that they can save means that they can achieve great savings. If they have to spend 10 hours a month, it's $20,000 per month per lawyer. So you can imagine that in those scenarios it can quickly add up. So this is the first, when it comes to the ROI dimension, that you want to look into. So for the sake of this presentation, I just want to show you basically if we are to look into the estimation. So job title, let's say financial analyst. This is just like an ROI simulator, but review investment report from 10 public stocks, generate buy sell recommendation. So this is just like the task description. So you would think about whatever you want to automate. Company activity, you would say asset management, London, UK. And this is a simulator. I'll be sharing the link to it. But let's say that, as a financial analyst, you're spending maybe 10 hours per stock and you're monitoring, 4 stocks, let's say 40 hours times per month, maybe once, let's say. And then basically you can just quickly get an order of magnitude of how much you'd be saving. And this is just going to scrape the salaries of financial analysts in London and just multiplying that by if it works.
The gods of the demo are never with you.
It is. It's so funny. It just never works. Okay, well.
It will.
It didn't work. I can't believe it. There we go. Okay, so annual cost savings is $12,000 and you would be saving 384 hours a year. So you can imagine that those are savings, but those are also hours that you could be allocating elsewhere. So this is not something that is directly taken into account in the savings, or in the total earnings from this automation. But this gives you an order of magnitude. Okay, are we tackling a small problem or are we tackling a big problem? And then the second section is around complexity. So with complexity, you basically have to identify. Going back to the presentation. So, and then the third section is the complexity, because with complexity comes, longer development cycles and meaning, that it's going to be more expensive. Basically, whether you build it internally or if you use a consultant, it's still like, resources that you're allocating. And I would say that there are different dimensions and probably we all have our own methodology, but I think that, there are like 6 or 7 dimensions that really come into play. Is first, are we looking at something that is fairly deterministic, or do we need to add some agentic capabilities? This really adds a layer of complexity because there's the prompting part to really understand how the agent behaves. There's a lot of debugging and this can take a lot of time. The accuracy needs. So are we talking about an internal productivity tool or something that will deliver some output to an end client where we cannot afford to be wrong? Or, if in the healthcare space or financial space, if you are to extract KPIs, you need to be hyper precise. So, those are additional layers that can drive complexity. Personalization needs, also the level of integrations. Do you need to integrate with one tool or do you need to integrate with 15 tools? Do you need to add a UI? So do you need to build an app and like a front end so that you can interact with your interaction? Or is this only going to happen in the background and you're just going to be receiving all the data, as a PDF via email or whatever? And then finally, how many interventions from a human do you need throughout the workflow and how are you going to incorporate that into the full scheme? So those are like some factors. Maybe coming back to your point, Guillaume, I think it would be interesting to hear, how you're getting, when you're generating those reports, you mentioned that it's easy to kind of get this wow factor initially, but then when you really want to make it super reliable, there's a lot that goes into it. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about, what it takes to go from MVP to production.
Yeah, I think it's really about, we're doing a bunch of things. So if I look at this, we think of it as what composes a task. If you had to delegate something to a new worker, think of how do you decompose what constitutes a task. When someone executes a task, i.e. creating a report, there's the person doing the task. There's kind of a user manual of like the various steps that have to be done. And there's the knowledge that's being used. Sometimes companies have frameworks. That's the user manual. These are all the things that we want to see in each section, etc. And the knowledge that's going to be used, sometimes the companies you have a very clear idea. Okay, I'm going to use Bloomberg to find financial data. I'm going to use this, all the different knowledge items. So to get it to pass this wow factor, you have to basically unpack that user manual. You have to unpack what are the knowledge items that are being used at which step. If you have then all those steps, what is something that is very mechanical, like organizing information, versus a moment where the person actually has to make a judgment call, and in those cases bring the power back into the hands of the user so that he decides live and the AI continues doing the work. You have to basically, the AI the output that you're going to get is a function of the action of the user the knowledge guide, the know-how guide, like the user manual, and the knowledge items that are going to be used. And so sometimes things are very well mapped, and sometimes everything has to be created, all the way to creating some new knowledge practices, like something we call like tacit knowledge practice. Is a lot of things is said in meetings, a lot of knowledge is accumulated during a project. Start recording now in your new project with clients. You're going to record all of your meetings, because this is going to be a knowledge pool that the agent will also use when you're going to be using the AI to write your final report. So it's a lot of very granular details, and it's a lot of small iterative steps, because you want to do, first you discover how they do things, then you give them an AI capability that works to a certain extent, and then there's a feedback loop of using it, figuring out what's working well, not well, and gradually implementing it, using the guides and this workflow map as a backbone to improve the accuracy and to improve the problem. And you get it to a level where the person feels comfortable with it a bit naturally. And the final point is then to use memory, which is the bit that's missing, which is then as it uses this capability to do the same task over and over again, it learns with the user, and it increases even more the accuracy and the performance of the capability.
Yeah. So we are discarding your workflow because I just got scared with the amount of complexity that comes with it. Now, obviously,
it's not something to start with.
Sorry?
It's not something to necessarily start with.
Yeah. So if you are to build your first automation, it might be a little bit intimidating, especially if you don't have anything mapped out. So garbage in, garbage out, that's also kind of the cliche saying. So you need to first start with workflows that are detached a bit, maybe from your internal best practices or SOPs, however you want to call them. So as part of this exercise, we are excluding the consulting reports. And now we are moving to the next step, which is, okay, well, out of those 3 workflows that we have discussed, which ones are clear with high ROI, feasibility, and urgency? In this case, we are just saying, and this is again illustrative for illustrative purposes, but it's very clear that email automation for inbound can be very valuable. High ROI because you don't want the owner to qualify those leads if they're important. And obviously if you're replying within seconds, I think you are tripling your success rate. So there's a lot of incentive in being quick replying. In terms of feasibility, it's fairly straightforward. You don't rely on too many internal SOPs. You can connect. There are already pre-built connectors to Gmail and so on. So it's fairly accessible. And then it's urgent because you are drowning in work and you don't want to spend more time qualifying random people who need $200 jobs. Which means that now that we have shortlisted our workflows, we are moving on to sketching. And so whenever you sketch a workflow, there are different dimensions. But from what we have discussed, there are basically 4 major parts. The first part is around input and output, right? So where does it start? Where does it end? So now you know this. Then you basically want to break down the different workflows, because workflows can be a sequence of events. So you can have, in this case, in the email automation, we are receiving the email, then you're extracting the information from the email, then you are enriching it, meaning that we are using a set of rules, internal tools to define whether this person is a good lead or not. And then we're classifying. So is this a big fish or someone irrelevant? So this is the first workflow. Then we have the decision map. So this is where you also need to, decide what are you going to do with this information? Do you actually want to escalate and send the big fish to qualified salespeople, or do you want to keep on going automatically? And the opposite is also true. If it's not relevant, you can just stop and not reply. And then you have the start of workflow 2, which is basically starting to draft the new email and send the answer. So those are the other sections. So and then the last dimension is, okay, we need to access those tools. And this is basically the knowledge base that we're talking about. So in order to enrich and define if this is a good lead or not, you have a set of rules. And so you need to build that knowledge base about what makes for a good lead or not. So essentially input, output, set of workflows, decision maps, and access to tools. So those are the 4 major components. And I'm just going to move on to basically then prototyping. So in terms of prototyping, there are different ways you can do it. Honestly, ChatGPT, you can already use it to play around and just try out. You can just pass it like a bunch of rules. You can say, hey, I just got this email from this person. Should I reply? And then you just pass it all the context. It can be like a very simple MVP. Then you can also use n8n or Dust, which are different orchestration platforms. And so in this case, you have the Gmail trigger. So all of this is just like a screenshot from n8n. And basically what you have is you have a Gmail trigger. It's listening for new emails. Then you have the workflow. You can see the workflow is connecting to my database to define whether it's a good lead or not a good lead. It's enriching and then deciding what to do next. And then basically the second workflow is just creating the draft and sending the email. So yeah, feel free to play around with Dust or n8n and ChatGPT. Even Mosaic offers the capability to play around and try your workflows. So yeah, that's pretty much it. In terms of, before I move on to this last step, maybe you want to add something, Guillaume? I just want to keep some minutes for questions, but anything you want to?
No, just get started.
Yeah, just get started, build momentum, find like the obvious workflow. If you're thinking about it, it's probably not the right workflow to start with. So it has to be kind of a no-brainer to start. And then over time, there are like different levers that you can use to improve the quality of your agents or of your automation. So the memory. So if you receive an email and 5 emails from that same person, it will register the previous interactions and decide the next step. So it's not starting from a clean slate, which is really kind of the revolutionary aspect with agents. Then reliability. There are a lot of ways you can set some fallbacks mechanism if it breaks. I'm not going to get into the details, but there are different ways you can ensure that you're not sending like a bunch of random quotes to people saying that you're selling, your company for a penny or whatever. And then finally, in terms of trust, you can add personality. You can always cite sources whenever you come up with an answer so that you feel more comfortable about the answer. And this is probably more relevant to the content generation of reports. You want to be able to trace whatever, how the agent came up with the answer and go back to the original source so that you can feel more comfortable about the automation. And then, yeah, just do it. So change management, buy-in, just get going, build an MVP, get some excitement internally, and then you can get on to the more complex stuff. So that's it. We are sharing this QR link where there's a little form where you can basically fill out whatever workflow you want to automate, and Guillaume and I will be reviewing each of them and come up with suggestions on how you can automate them. So you can just download the link. This is also a short URL to the form, so feel free to do that. And we have a couple of minutes left for those who want to ask questions.
We will email this as well, right?
Yeah, everything. You're going to receive the presentation as well as the link to the form in 38 minutes.
Did you set an email automation tool to qualify or no?
To qualify, everyone is qualified here.
I'm joking.
I hope so. No, I'm kidding. So yeah, you can add in the chat if you have any questions in the Q&A. Feel free to just shoot. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Mosaic is the most robust solution out there.
Is it the most cost effective?
Well, it's the most cost effective considering all the money you're going to make.
Exactly. Think in terms of ROI.
I think there's another question. Okay, no. You're disqualified, David, unfortunately.
Well, his wallet is out, so actually he's qualified.
Wallet is out, or he loves money? Okay. No, but yeah. I think if you work in finance, we can help you with making sure that your competitors don't work 10 times faster than you, because what's for sure is that a company that adopts the right AI solution today with 10 people will destroy a company with 100 people within the next 48 months, because you can 10x yourself for sure. So you better get started and just do it.
Just do it. Not from us.
Thank you, Vincent.
Thanks, Vincent. Yes.
No nonsense. Happy for that. No BS.
Okay. Well, we're going to wait for another maybe 1 or 2 minutes. Don't be shy. We're not too many in the room. This is intimate.
You can ask anything, even like for the weather and stuff, just so that we have something to say. Okay.
All right. Well, you can also just reply to the email that we're going to send you with all the resources. Happy to look into your workflows. So thanks a lot to you all for joining. Thanks, Guillaume, for doing this together. And yeah, hopefully we'll do more of this. And if you have any feedback on how you would, the topics you would like us to cover, just let us know.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.